A decade ago, trains like this symbolized Europe's open door, refugees arriving to applause, volunteers lining the platforms. Today, those same images hang over a very different debate as Denmark and now Britain try to make refugee protection more temporary, more conditional, and ultimately less attractive.
Since 2015 and really since 2019, the Danish asylum policy has been to consider refugee stays in Denmark as only temporary. That means that they will have to renew their residence permit every 1 or 2 years, and they can only apply for permanent residence after 8 years. The reason for these changes were that the Danish authorities were trying to show that protection is only relevant as long as there's a need, as long as it's not safe to go back home. In reality, though, we have seen that hardly anybody has had their residence permit withdrawn because of these rules, which means that although people remain here on a temporary residence permit, they will probably remain here for many, many years.
In Denmark, people like Ali from Iraq and Safi from Afghanistan live in a strange limbo, stuck in deportation centers or on short-term permits, never quite knowing if they're building a life or waiting to be sent back. The policy on paper says temporary protection, but in practice, many stay for years without real security.
The effect of having the residence permits being only temporary has been for many refugees that it has been more difficult to learn the language, to get jobs, and to integrate into Danish society because they have this constant uncertainty about whether they will actually be allowed to remain here. We also see this uncertainty among staff from the local authorities who are responsible for assisting newcomers with the integration program. And we even see it from employers who also feel uncertain whether they should invest time and energy in hiring refugees because they cannot be certain that they will actually remain in the country.
All of this is happening while Denmark remains bound by the same European human rights laws as its neighbours. The European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg looms large in the debate, a reminder that even the toughest asylum systems are meant to sit within shared legal standards.
The present government in Denmark, and actually many governments before that, have all acknowledged and recognized that Denmark needs to remain part of the Refugee Convention, but also the European Convention on Human Rights. At the same time, various Danish governments have also criticized that the decisions from the European Court of Human Rights have been too restrictive in restricting the possibilities of the states to, especially to deport people who have committed serious crimes in Denmark and who should be deported to their home country. So we have had a continuous discussion on this in Denmark, but for the main central parties, I think it has always been very clear that they do not wish to withdraw from any of the major conventions, that Denmark has a big advantage out of being part of the Refugee Convention and especially the European Convention on Human Rights. So this is really not for discussion for central parties, but possibly for parties on the far right.
In Copenhagen, community centers like this used to symbolize a different promise that if you reached Denmark and were recognized as a refugee, you could slowly rebuild, learn the language, and become part of society. Now, refugees and the officials who work with them are constantly looking over their shoulder, unsure how long any status will last.
It is a particular situation for people who have actually been recognized as refugees in Denmark, whether they can have their residence permit withdrawn by the Danish authorities, and will they be returned to their home country in that situation. And here we have seen that for a couple of years, the Danish authorities have withdrawn temporary protection status for some Syrians coming from Damascus. So they have withdrawn their residence permit, but at the same time, the Danish government has not wanted to cooperate with the Syrian government, and therefore nobody has been returned by force to Syria at all.
These scenes from 2015, refugees stepping off trains, making hard signs, greeted by cheers, captured the best of Europe's solidarity at the height of the Syrian crisis. But they also triggered a backlash. In the years since, Denmark has tightened its laws again and again, helping to drive asylum numbers to a 40-year low.
I think that in Denmark, the general economic situation is actually quite good. So it's, if you have arguments against refugees and foreigners coming, it's not so much an economic argument as it is a question of people coming with a different culture, a different background, and Denmark being, of course, a very small country with a language only spoken by 6 million people. There's some discussions and some concerns that the too many people coming to our country at the same time may cause some disruption to Danish culture and Danish norms.
Police now stand alongside citizens who still turn out to welcome new arrivals, but the political mood has hardened. Concerns about culture and identity rather than economics increasingly shape the argument over who gets to stay and on what terms.
In Denmark, we have a lot of criticism of the asylum laws, but I think we also need to acknowledge some of the very positive things. And one of the very positive things is the very close collaboration we have between authorities and civil society. And this is particularly true when we talk about integration of newcomers, where the local authorities, civil society and employers, they work together to try to create jobs, but also to find volunteers who can assist the newcomers understanding the Danish society and the many, many rules which we have.
On the platforms, the slogans tell the story. Some refugees insisting they don't want to stay in Denmark at all, others simply trying to move on. For many, the country has become not a destination but a warning, a place where protection can be taken away almost as quickly as it is granted.
The Danish government will probably say that the lower number of asylum seekers coming to Denmark in the past couple of years, maybe 4 or 5 years, is due to the very negative image that Denmark has been able to obtain outside of Denmark. And one of the issues is the whole temporariness of protection. So the Danish government will say that this was necessary to keep the numbers down. And they would also say that the numbers need to be down, and for some parties even further down until about 0, in order to be able to integrate the few people who do come to Denmark.
Yet the boats keep coming off the coast of northern France and in the Channel. People still risk their lives in flimsy dinghies, chased by patrols on sea and land. Rights groups say no one studies policy charts before they flee. They go where they have family, language, or even just a hope of safety.
When Denmark has this policy whereby they are trying to avoid refugees coming to Denmark, it basically sends a signal that other countries should bear the responsibility for refugees coming to Europe. And we can see that the number of refugees coming to Europe is decreasing sometimes, but then it rises again. And that's obviously because people still need a place to seek sanctuary. They still need to escape from their home countries where they are persecuted or where there's really violent conflict, like we can see it now with Sudan. So the solution that Denmark is trying to adopt is only relevant and is only possible as long as other countries keep their doors open for refugees. And if other countries try to imitate what Denmark is doing, the refugees will have to go somewhere else, and then that means that your neighboring countries in Europe will be responsible for a larger number of refugees.
In London, Denmark's experiment is now echoing through the House of Commons. Interior Minister Shabana Mahmood rises to announce what the Labour government calls the biggest overhaul of Britain's asylum system in modern times. Under the new plan, refugee status will no longer be a stepping stone to permanent settlement. Instead, it will be a 2.5-year permit repeatedly reviewed, with permanent status pushed for into the future, 2 decades away for many. At the heart of the reforms is a political calculation: reassure voters tempted by the populist Reform UK party that Labour will get tougher on irregular migration, especially small boat crossings, without formally walking away from the European Convention on Human Rights. Mahmood says Britain will seek changes in Strasbourg so it can deport more people it deems to have no right to stay, including some who arrived illegally and later won protection. The government will also revoke support for certain asylum seekers who refuse to work or who commit crimes, arguing that taxpayer help should go first to those contributing to the economy and local communities. Critics warn that copying Denmark risks importing its problems too: years of uncertainty, fragile integration, and a more hostile climate for refugees. Supporters say tough rules are the only way to keep numbers down and maintain public consent. As Britain moves to match and exceed some of Europe's strictest standards, the question now is not just who will be allowed in, but what refuge really means if safety comes with an expiry date.
We must act too. We will do so by making refugee status temporary, not permanent. A grant of refugee status will last 2.5 years, not 5. It will be renewed only if it is impossible for a refugee to return home. Permanent settlement will now come at 20 years, not 5. Further sanctions will follow. There is no doubt that the expanded interpretation of parts of the European Convention on Human Rights has contributed. This is particularly true of Article 8, the right to a family life. The courts have adopted an ever-expanding interpretation of this right, and as a result, many people have been allowed to come to this country when they would otherwise have had no right to, of our own system. As Article 3 is an absolute right, a public interest test cannot be applied. For that reason, we are seeking reform at the Council of Europe. And we do so alongside international partners who have raised similar concerns.